This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
WHO chief says vaccine nationalism is putting the world on the brink of catastrophic moral failure. Residents flee West Darfur city after militia attacks. And the UN warns that Somalia is at risk from an election row and US troops withdraw. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. The details on those stories in just a moment, but first, here's Uche Okoronkwo with the day's business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Beatrice. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live, please. Nigeria to sanction firms that violate laws that govern the hiring of expatriates. And Egypt signs a deal with the European Investment Bank for the expansion of its metro and light rail lines. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you, Beatrice.
Uche, thank you. And let's begin the broadcast in Geneva, where the World Health Organization has held a special summit to discuss the COVAX vaccine sharing scheme. According to the World Health Organization's Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the world is on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure in sharing COVID-19 vaccines. Dr. Tedros is urging countries and manufacturers to spread doses more fairly around the world. Tedros also says prospects for equitable distribution were at serious risk, just as the COVAX vaccine sharing scheme. He also noted that more than 39 million vaccine doses have been administered in 49 higher income countries, whereas just 25 doses had been given in one poor country. The global scramble for shots has intensified as more infectious virus variants circulate.
I need to be blunt. The world is on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure. And the price of this failure will be paid with lives and livelihoods in the world's poorest countries. Even as they speak the language of equitable access, some countries and companies continue to prioritize bilateral deals, going around COVAX, driving up prices and attempting to jump to the front of the queue. This is wrong. 44 bilateral deals were signed last year, and at least 12 have already been signed this year. Not only does this me-first approach leave the world's poorest and most vulnerable people at risk, it's also self-defeating. Ultimately, these actions will only prolong the pandemic, prolong our pain. The restrictions needed to contain it, and human and economic suffering.
Meanwhile, Uganda is ramping up the use of rapid diagnostic testing for COVID-19 following a surge in cases. The country is closing in on 40,000 cases and has so far registered more than 300 deaths. The rapid diagnostic tests have been approved by the World Health Organization. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports.
Uganda's health ministry says rolling out rapid test kits will increase the number of people being screened for COVID-19. The move will help isolate infected people and their contacts in order to reduce exposure and break transmission.
We already reached the stage 4. We have community transmission. Many people are infected, but we don't know them. Many are asymptomatic. Actually, those who are reporting is an underestimate because we don't test everyone.
The health ministry is now deploying antigen rapid diagnostic testing kits to ease treatment.
We have now 2 kits that we have recommended to be given in a phased-out manner. The one is called the SD biosensor, made in South Korea, and another one is by Abbott. And we have said this should be used in a phased manner in those individuals who are symptomatic, to allow quick decision-making.
The antigen rapid diagnostic testing kits are being deployed to high-risk areas in the country. health workers are targeting patients with symptoms of COVID-19, frontline health workers, and people in crowded places such as schools and prisons. The Ugandan government is also in the process of procuring vaccines. The jabs are expected to be available in 2 months.
AstraZeneca, initial phase, because initial phase we hadn't mobilized resources, and Gavi is going to give us the first initial 20%. The subsequent government is supposed to mobilize resources on our own, and we are looking at also procuring from China, provided that that process is complete.
It's hoped that these interventions by the Health Ministry could help contain the spread of the virus. Hilary Isga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And Brazil has approved 2 coronavirus vaccines from China and the UK. Latin America's largest nation will manufacture both vaccines and is planning a nationwide rollout in coming days. Lucrecia Franco reports from Rio de Janeiro.
Slow out of the gates, Brazil finally started its coronavirus inoculation campaign after the emergency use approval of 2 vaccines on Sunday. Monica Calazans, a 50-year-old nurse, was the first in the country to receive China's CoronaVac vaccine. With more than 209,000 fatalities and the daily death toll once again topping 1,000, it was an injection of good news.
Temos vacina.
The announcement came after an hours-long public presentation of Brazil's health regulator Anvisa, which gave the green light to both China's CoronaVac and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccines. Experts say the approval is a good start.
We need it urgently. We need both of these vaccines. And both being approved, it means that we'll have access to 2 different vaccines, 2 good vaccines.
The news comes as Manaus, the capital of the state of Amazonas, is facing an explosion of COVID-19 infections and deaths that could be linked to a newly discovered variant. For its initial vaccine supplies, Brazil is relying on 6 million CoronaVac doses that have already arrived from China and plans to send a plane equipped with the special freezers to India this week to fetch 2 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Brazil is placing its faith in vaccines that can be manufactured locally, and the Minister of Health has guaranteed the availability of more than 350 million doses by the end of the year. 2 facilities are ramping up their capacity. The CoronaVac will be produced by São Paulo's Butantan Institute and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine by Rio de Janeiro's Oswaldo Cruz Foundation. But led by vaccine skeptic President Jair Bolsonaro, Brazilians are divided over whether to take the shots or not.
Although I think the outbreak was poorly handled, given how serious the situation is, vaccinations need to start now.
I'm not taking the vaccine. I don't believe in it.
But Brazil is under pressure. The new variant of the virus prompted the UK and Italy to impose a ban on Brazilian travelers, another sign of how urgently the country needs to roll out its vaccination campaign. Lucrecia Franco, CGTN, Rio de Janeiro.
To Sudan now, where residents in the western Darfur city of El Geneina are fleeing the area. This comes after militiamen attacked the area on Sunday, leaving at least 83 people dead and about 160 others injured. The Sudanese defense minister says military reinforcements have been sent to the city. According to the country's sovereign council, members of the armed forces were also among the victims, and violence has increased in Darfur in recent months. Incidents such as Sunday's attack have occurred in Darfur since conflict broke out in 2003. Well, let's look at other stories we're following for you today and go to Somalia, where In the East African nation, the United Nations says the postponement of elections in Somalia is threatening stability in the country. The body's special representative James Swan has accused political leaders of interference with the electoral process, hence the delay. The polls were to be held last month, and now the UN fears the tension could spark warfare. It has also warned that the country's security is threatened, especially following the withdrawal of US soldiers. The troops have been training Somalia's special forces and have also been conducting airstrikes against Al-Shabaab militants. Well, CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo is joining us for more from Mogadishu. Abdulaziz, what is the latest on the parliamentary elections originally due to be held last month?
Well, Beatrice, the Electoral Commission announced new dates, saying that the elections will take place from the 7th to the 15th of January, and apparently that deadline seems to have passed, and there's been no formal communication from the Federal Electoral Implementation Team, that is the interim electoral body that is tasked with leading the 2021 parliamentary, Senate and presidential elections. So the concern here in Mogadishu is that two regional states from Jubaland and Puntland are yet to submit their representatives to the regional body FATE, that is the Federal Electoral Implementation Team. Those 8 teams from each side are supposed to be trained in Mogadishu and later redeployed to the regions to oversee the election of members of parliament and senators. So the two regional states are opposed to that process. Jubaland on its part says that no elections will take place in that region as long as the regional administration is not in control of the Gedo region, specifically Gerbahari, that is where the election was due to take place, apart from Kismayo, that is in Jubaland. So unless federal troops are pulled out of Gerbahari and in the entire Gedo region, Jubaland argues that no polls will take place in that area, and Puntland is also siding with Jubaland. And also there's also debate about the Electoral Commission. The members of opposition are accusing the government of trying to tilt the election in its own favor. They are accusing the Electoral Committee of being made up of the president's allies, members of the civil servants, as well as members of the Somali security forces. The Somali government has denied all these claims, and the Prime Minister recently met with regional leaders as well as the governor of Mogadishu. They talked about the elections, and the government gave its blessing, saying that the country has entered an electoral mode. But so far there's been no tangible progress on the ground. The Electoral Committee is still in Mogadishu, apart from one team that has been deployed to the southwest state. So for now, according to the government, the country is in electoral mode, but the opposition are crying out, saying that the polls cannot take place partially.
Well, on another issue, Abdulaziz, the U.S. military says the withdrawal of its troops from Somalia is complete. How worrying is this departure, and how will it impact security in Somalia and indeed across the region?
Well, Beatrice, just a few minutes before we came to this live cross, there was a statement from the U.S. Africa Command, that is the command unit that belongs to the U.S. that is tasked with overseeing the regional security of the U.S. here in Africa. They issued a statement announcing that the top U.S. general in Somalia arrived today in Mogadishu, met with the Somali defense minister, also met with the chief of armed forces, as well as the American ambassador here to Somalia, Donald Yamamoto, to talk about the vacuum that will be left behind after U.S. repositions its troops out of Somalia. So the exercise officially ended on the 15th of January. U.S. troops amounting to almost 700 who are based in Somalia were redeployed to nearby bases, especially in Manda Bay in Kenya, and others who are also deployed to Djibouti, that is home to the biggest U.S. forces here in Africa, the biggest base, Camp Lemonia. So authorities in Somalia have raised their concerns time and again. The president of Somalia objected to the withdrawal of the U.S. forces, but then again it came under Donald Trump, who issued an executive order. So there's nothing that the Somali government can do. So apart from the move by the president calling on the U.S. not to withdraw its forces, this biggest security challenge now that will face Somalia is the troops that American troops are training, that is the elite unit called DANAP. So if there is no support that they're receiving from the U.S. forces, then it will deal a major blow. But then the U.S. says that it will remain in Somalia and conduct more drone strikes against Al-Shabaab. It has already conducted almost 5 drone strikes in the past few days, destroying Al-Shabaab compounds, killing top Al-Shabaab commanders, and it says that it will remain Somalia's #1 ally in the fight against Al-Shabaab.
Abdulaziz Bello joining us there from Mogadishu with that update. Well, let's revisit our story in Sudan, where residents in the western Darfur city of El Geneina are fleeing the area. Well, this comes after militiamen attacked the area on Sunday, leaving at least 83 people dead and about 160 others injured. Well, let's cross over now to Dr. Andrew Yao Chie, a senior fellow at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, for more on what is happening in Darfur. He's joining us via Zoom. Dr. Chia, thank you for joining us on Africa Live. How serious, first off, is the situation in Darfur?
Thank you very much for having me, Beatrice. And as you did mention, there are 83 people who have died and over 160 that we know of who have been injured during this situation. Now, the situation is quite serious if you think about it in comparison to previous, more recent attacks or events that have taken place, or violence, if that's a better way of putting it. But what is also interesting about this one is that it seems to be escalating between, as many have said, the Arab communities and non-Arab tribes in the western Darfur area. Now, IDP camp violence is nothing new. This has been a flashpoint in the past, but the more significant numbers have been killed this time around since the UN departed or wound up its mission and transformed itself into a political mission over the last 2 weeks. So it is quite significant because the government is responsible now for the protection of civilians, and what it does show is that if the government doesn't get a grip of the situation and the local government or local governor doesn't get a grip, this situation could continue to escalate into more violence, which is not what we want to see in Sudan at the moment.
So the government is responsible for the safety of civilians at the moment, but what role is the withdrawal of all UNAMID personnel playing in what is happening now?
Well, that mission is wound down. It's wound down 2 years ago after 13 years. So in sense of protection of the civilians as it goes, this is now down to the government and the local governor or governorships to be able to deal with this situation. So really, the new mission, which is the United Nations Integrated Transitional Assistance Mission in Sudan, is really about supporting the political process that is in Sudan. So this situation is at the feet of the government to deal with. And so really, if the government doesn't get a grip and put in place the right resources, the right security personnel, and I do sort of want to emphasize the right security personnel is important given the history of the various different Janjaweed groups and the RSF in the area, it will continue to go on. But importantly, beyond that, there needs to be a way of bringing these communities together that they can foster dialogue and have better ways of being able to deal with this situation, because this has been a problem even when UNAMID was there before.
So this problem, the conflict in Darfur, has been ongoing since around 2003. How can this problem be resolved?
Well, I think there are a few things. As you said, it has been going on for a while. There needs to be better strategic oversight and planning by the government, particularly the security forces, but also the political transitional government when it comes to dealing with the situation. At the local level and the community-based level, there needs to be the capacity for community leaders and elders to bring the different IDP groups together and the Arab communities together to have a dialogue and to foster reconciliation and better understanding of one another. There needs to be a serious discussion about the protection of civilians mandate that is in place by the Sudanese government. What is its plan? How long is this plan going to be put in place? What are the resources? What capacity does the government have or lack? And what support does it need, maybe from international donors to be able to support some of the work that it's doing? But as I said earlier, what is crucial is that the government and the local governance will need a long-term plan. This needs to be driven by the local authorities to be able to deal and resolve the issues. And if you're not able to do that, then you're not going to be able to diffuse long-term violence, but also you won't be able to diffuse the possibility of other outbursts of violence between communities in the future.
All right, Dr. Andrew Chie joining us there via Zoom with that update on Sudan's Darfur area. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Rescue workers make a phone contact with trapped miners. And armed Trump supporters gather outside state capitals ahead of Biden's inauguration.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Rescuers are working around the clock to bring 22 miners back to the ground. A gold mine collapsed in East China's Shandong province on Sunday. Those 22 miners have now been trapped underground for 9 days. The good news, rescuers have finally established contact with them. Earlier, we spoke to our reporter Huang Yue on the latest situation there.
Local authorities said after 9 days, they finally got contact with some of the trapped miners because 2 of the 6 holes have been drilled through the tunnels. At about 2 p.m. yesterday, the number 3 drill hole reached the tunnel at the depth of 586.8 meters, and rescuers heard the miners knocking on the drill pipe. You know, rescuers have also delivered a phone down to the miners, and they have made phone call with them. The miner on the phone said 11 of them are together, and the one person at depth of 637 meters used to contact them, but they haven't heard any further response from him recently. Rescuers also have played live detecting equipment to the tunnel, and experts say the equipment can send back images and audios, and that will help them to find the rest trapped miners. The rescue operation is now facing great difficulties, and the most difficult thing has been to clear up the obstacles and the debris stuck in the shaft. So far, the debris above the depth of 350 meters have been cleared up, but this is just 10 meters deeper than 4 days ago. Geological conditions are quite complex here as well. You know, there are many zones that have been crushed underground, and some drills actually hit the crushed zone, and drill bits were stuck in the rock cracks as they go deeper. And there are also zones holding water. When they drill the holes through the tunnel, it's very possible the groundwater could gush into the tunnel, which would also endanger the trapped miners. And last but not least, the rocks surrounding the gold mine are mostly granites, which are very hard to drill.
And here is a closer look at the moment when rescuers received a response from underground when they knocked on the drill rod. It's when the first sign of hope finally emerged and what is keeping the rescue teams going on. Again, rescue teams have been drilling 6 shafts to reach the miners who've been trapped 600 meters from the mine opening. On Sunday evening, food and other supplies were sent in via a wire, and rescuers say they felt a tug on the wire. When they pulled the wire back, 35 minutes later, they found a note attached to it. The heart-rending message described the risky conditions underground, saying there is little air circulation and lots of water and smoke. It confirmed that 22 people are trapped underground and suggested that at least 12 workers are still alive. But the fate of the other 10 is unknown. The note also said the miners are exhausted and that they need medicines, bandages and painkillers. In the United States, security is being stepped up across the nation ahead of Joe Biden's inauguration. Small groups of armed supporters of President Donald Trump have already been marching to some state capitals. Our correspondent Jagruti Dave in Washington, D.C. tells us more.
We know that they are not the huge, massive groups of protests that many states were bracing for in light of the warning from the FBI that there could be possible armed protests in every state across the country. These were small groups. Some reports say that law enforcement and indeed the media outnumbered many of these groups. Some of them were armed. You've got reports in places like Austin, Texas, where people showed up outside state Capitol buildings with weapons. Some of them are Trump supporters. Some of the people are a movement called the Boogaloo Boys, who are an anti-government, pro-gun group. But as I say, it wasn't a huge groundswell of protests that people were fearing that could lead to further violence in places outside of Washington, D.C. We know that according to reports in the New York Times, particularly reporting that at least 19 states had deployed the National Guard, sort of mirroring what we're seeing here in Washington, D.C. with the deployment of more than 20,000 National Guard in the lead up to the inauguration.
The recently elected Egyptian House of Representatives held its first session this week. Women rights activists have hailed its composition as the House now has 162 women as members. This is the biggest number of seats held by women in Egyptian history and more than the 25% quota set by the Egyptian constitution. Here's Adel Mahroui with more details.
Egypt's National Council for Women says 2021 is the golden year for women in the Egyptian parliament. 162 women have taken their oaths of service this week, and their numbers in the House now make up almost 26% of the parliamentary seats. The legislative chamber has never had these many females since its establishment in 1866.
The President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi have insisted and have focused on increasing people's awareness on increasing women's participation in the economy and in the government. Even during 2017, the president started his campaigns. The 2030 vision that's going to be in 2030, which is assuming that the women participation is going to be up to 50%. And I think, in my opinion, that it's going to be even in less period than 2030.
Ghada Ali has been recently elected for the first time as a member of parliament. She teaches business at Cairo University and has spent 7 years in public services fighting violence against women and promoting youth entrepreneurship.
I have had my share of public service, but I've never imagined that one day I would become an empowered youth by getting elected to parliament. The legislative hall has become a sacred place to me, which I had never visited before my first session. I had mixed feelings of fear and pride while entering the hall for the first time. I hope that I can make a change and leave a mark for women there.
The 2019 constitutional amendment, which has seen President el-Sisi's years in office extended, was a game changer for Egyptian women. It has increased the women's quota in the parliament to 25%. Additionally, through it, the president gets to appoint 28 members. Half of them this year were women. While it is clear there is political will to empower Egyptian women, that might not necessarily be achieved on a popular level. The quota for Egyptian women in the parliament was achieved through the list voting seats. But in the highly competitive individual seats race, only 6 women managed to defeat their male rivals in their constituencies. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Staying in Egypt, authorities have announced the first set of archaeological discoveries in 2021. Monuments that date back 3,000 years ago to the New Kingdom have been unearthed at the Saqqara necropolis north of the Giza Plateau. The famous archaeologist Zal Hawass led the team that made this discovery. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has more details.
The new discoveries include a funerary temple and 52 burial shafts that contain hundreds of well-decorated wooden coffins with their artifacts still in good condition. Chess-like games and a luxurious Midbrook shrine were also in the shaft below. The significance of this latest discovery is that it's the first time monuments from the New Kingdom have been found in Saqqara.
The discovery that we made at Saqqara on the shadow of the Step Pyramid, the oldest pyramid in Egypt, is a very important discovery. The first thing that we discovered today, we discovered the funerary temple of a pyramid that I found in 2010. The funerary temple had unique architecture components, and inside we found the name of the queen. Her name was Neat. She was the wife and she was the daughter of the king, and the first time that we know also in the Old Kingdom that the king could marry his daughter.
These latest discoveries are the result of joint efforts between the Supreme Council of Antiquities and the recently established Zahi Hawass Archaeological Center at the Library of Alexandria.
We started to follow what Dr. Zahi Hawass is doing, participating with him, and this what we see today is an integral part of the activities of the Library of Alexandria, because we feel that it's our duty to go after the heritage, the history. You know, this is the wealth of Egypt.
More findings are expected to be unearthed soon to give a clearer outlook on the role of the Saqqara necropolis in ancient Egypt.
We expect to find more objects in this area. I've told you that this is very, very promising site, and it's a very virgin site, so we expect to find a lot. It's just the beginning of the discovery. It's not the end.
And just like in the past, these excavations have once again attracted the attention of the world, while revealing new but ancient secrets in the process. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's now go to Uche Okronko for a look at the day's business news. Uche.
Thanks, Beatrice. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Nigeria to sanction firms that violate laws that govern the hiring of expatriates. And Egypt signs a deal with the European Investment Bank for the expansion of its metro and light rail lines.
It's taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Well, let's start off in Nigeria. The country will begin sanctioning companies that fail to comply with its expatriate quota policy in a move aimed at creating employment opportunities for the locals. Now, with unemployment in Nigeria rising every year, the government has resolved to enforce compliance, and that's following claims of violations by companies that favor expatriates. From Abuja, here is Kelechi Mekalam with the details.
It's been 7 years since Cameroonian Cecile Dombe migrated to Nigeria. In 2016, she set up her travels and tours company in the nation's capital, Abuja. Over 90% of her workers are Nigerians, some on full employment and others on internship. The internal procedure of Cecile's firm also supports career growth for local employees.
Actually have a case like that. He came as an intern. After his internship, he said, okay, could I stay? We negotiated the term and agreement. We gave him we are giving him a 3-month probation. And then from there, so we have that career growth pattern. Yeah, we are satisfied with the Nigerian staff so far.
Unlike Cecile's, several foreign-owned companies have been faulted for not complying with the expatriate quota policy. Recently, government launched a task force to monitor and enforce implementation.
The whole management and every part of it is just expatriates, and the only indigenous in poor are cleaners and security men. It's very important for the health of the company itself. They may boycott your products in the country because there are negative adverse publicity against the expatriate company.
From demanding higher pay to the lack of willingness to learn, some businesses are faced with several challenges from local personnel. So looking to hire from the international labour market becomes a more viable option. And that has impacted on expatriates' decision to integrate more locals into higher levels.
I don't think they are really tapping into that opportunity the government has put in place for them to be learning on that, to be studying, because actually is studying the expatriate to be able, when that position left, to be able to take over. That's actually it. Now, Nigerian, when you go to the labor market, it's more about how much they can make. They want to make the same money with that expatriate.
Nigeria is looking to rebuild its battered economy, and government's been opening its doors to foreign investors and promoting policies to make it easier for such businesses to thrive. But authorities say they would not hold back on sanctioning foreign organizations that deny Nigerians job opportunities, even at the management levels. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, in Egypt, the government and the European Investment Bank have signed a $1.4 billion agreement to rehabilitate and expand metro and light rail lines in the cities of Cairo and Alexandria. Now, the EIB funds will be issued in 2 tranches and will support the development of 3 projects in the 2 cities. From Cairo, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
The €1.13 billion loan from the European Investment Bank will help upgrade and extend 2 tram lines in the city of Alexandria and develop an underground metro line in the capital, Cairo. It's part of a comprehensive project to develop the railway system in the North African country.
To depend on vehicles or road transport of people and goods costs a lot of hard currency, as it leads to increased importation of fuel. It pollutes the air, affects our health and causes traffic jams. The upgraded railway transport system is based on clean energy, it's good for the environment and is a cheaper source of energy.
Statistics show that about 1.5 million people use trains daily and 2 million others use the underground. Those figures will more than double after the upgrade, relieving the pressure of streets and roads. This ambitious project is costly. However, Cairo has been receiving financial support from several international organizations, such as the European International Bank.
The transport sector, the infrastructure sector as a whole, is currently the leading force for the Egyptian economy. So any smart investment here should be in infrastructure, building new roads, transport systems, clean energy, and more.
Egypt has already received the first tranche of €600 million from the EIB to begin work on the projects. The rest of the funds from the €1.13 billion loan are expected in the first quarter of the year. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And moving on now, the chaos that ensued at the Bight Bridge border between South Africa and Zimbabwe over the festive season should serve as an important lesson for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Now, this is the message from road and freight bodies across the continent. A truck driver died while waiting to get through the border post, and the incident has sparked some concerns of a full-blown humanitarian crisis at Bight Bridge. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu reporting.
It was a combination of inadequate capacity and issues around COVID that caused the chaos between South Africa and Zimbabwe. The Bight Bridge border post is one of the busiest from South Africa.
We wouldn't have had to have this disaster if people did not leave the holding areas. Now, of course, we have learned a lesson that once we establish a process with the truck industry, we must believe then they will follow it forever. They've shown us that they need to be policed continuously, every minute.
Last year, Zimbabwe exported goods to South Africa worth over $1.57 billion. Its imports total $2.2 billion. And the plan not only for these two countries, but the whole of the continent is to create more ease of trade, increase imports and exports and reduce costs. But on the eve of the landmark Africa Free Trade Area coming into place, there was clear evidence that not everyone is ready.
We hope to come up with a plan that we'll be able to work together collectively and make things work in future, because the smooth flow of traffic and people through border posts is an absolute must for ACFA to work.
It's less chaotic at the border post this week, but there are still queues. But that's also because South Africa has now closed the border posts until the 15th of Feb. Only those doing trade will be able to gain access.
So far, this time it's easier. It's easier now crossing here to Zimbabwe side, yeah. Unlike last year, December time. This time it's okay.
This border, it's okay, but the last days it's tough to cross here to go to other side. It's a lot of trucks here, a lot of congestion. But now it's now clear. No problem now.
Freight bodies believe there's so much more work to be done before the African Free Trade Agreement can be implemented effectively.
There's a lot to be done in Southern Africa in terms of border post efficiency. We are so far behind East Africa in terms of the development of one-stop border posts and single customs territories and regional bonds, which improves the smooth flow and of cargo through the borders from origin to destination. That hasn't happened in South Africa, largely due to lack of political will in the region.
The road and freight sector want cargo to have its own access through borders. South Africa is in the meantime looking into infrastructure developments to improve efficiency and capacity. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, South Africa.
And to some international news now. In South Korea, a court has sentenced Samsung heir Jae Lee to 2.5 years in prison on a bribery charge. Now, earlier we spoke with Jack Barton in Seoul for more.
Lee Jae-young accused of bribing Choi Son-sil, the president's friend, in order to get the president to sign off on a merger at the time between two subsidiaries of Samsung that really would have cemented his position and put him right in line to take that top job. Now, this is the fourth time we've seen a result in the court. There was the initial 5-year sentence, and then there was appeals that was reduced to a 2.5-year sentence and then suspended. But the Supreme Court stepped in here and said, you can suspend a sentence below 3 years, but you can't reduce it down from 5 years to 2.5 and then suspend it. That is not the correct procedure. So they ordered a full retrial. Even more charges were brought in, and the end result is that reduced sentence is going to stand, but that Lee Jae-young is actually going to have to serve some time. Now, those who support Lee Jae-young have said this is a travesty of justice. You know, Samsung has done more than any other company to really support the economy here during the COVID pandemic and to, give that economy the vital support it's needed. But critics say this sends the right message through the big conglomerates that corruption will no longer be tolerated. And it's important to remember that it wasn't just Samsung that was involved in this case with the president. Most of the big conglomerates, including Hyundai, were also involved. It's just the prosecutors decided to go after one to ensure, in their minds, they thought they were ensuring there would be a conviction, and so they went after Samsung. But this really sends a message to all the big companies here that corruption will no longer be tolerated.
Now, China's Statistics Bureau says the country's economy showed steady recovery in 2020, exceeding expectations amid a roller coaster of a year. Here's CGTN's Gao Ang taking a look at those numbers.
Unhindered growth amid a pandemic. According to preliminary estimates, China's GDP grew 2.3% in 2020. It has also exceeded 100 trillion yuan, or $15.4 trillion for the first time. There was a contraction of more than 6% in the first quarter last year, the lowest point in history. But this was followed by an expansion of over 3% in the second quarter and over 4% in the third quarter, hitting 6.5% in the final quarter of 2020.
The pandemic prevention and control work has achieved major results, and benchmarks for economic and social development were accomplished, exceeding expectations.
Ning says China's grain output reached a high point, while pork production sustained a fast recovery for 2020. There was also growth in industrial production, high-tech manufacturing, and foreign trade. Ning pointed to several factors leading to economic recovery.
With a population of 1.4 billion people and more than 400 million middle-income earners, China's domestic market boasts the largest growth potential in the world. The advantages of a super large-scale market are obvious. In the new year, no matter how the international situation changes, the domestic market is our foothold to more development.
The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, predicted in October that global GDP would contract by 4.4% for 2020. It also projected that China could be the only major economy to grow last year. As economic expansion is important, Ning says China is keeping an eye on how it turns out. China has been paying more attention to quality of growth. Officials say that boosting domestic consumption and promoting innovation are two key methods to support continued development amid uncertainties brought on by fast-changing external circumstances. Gao Ang, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, Nigeria has adopted a new finance act that, amongst other things, allows the government to borrow from unclaimed dividends. We'll be taking a closer look at that act. Of course, all that coming up at top of the hour. For now, it is back to you, Beatrice.
Uche, thank you. And we still have more news for you on current affairs. Here's what's coming up. South Africa's endangered Cape Cormorant chicks rescued from Robben Island.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Let's now go to South Africa, where many endangered Cape Cormorant chicks have been rescued from Robben Island in Cape Town. They have been abandoned there by their parents and left to fend for themselves when rescuers found them. The chicks are now being cared for at a nearby hospital for seabirds. Here is CGTN's Travers Andrews with that report.
They were found exhausted, hungry and in bad shape. But after a successful rescue, these Cape Cormorant chicks are now on the mend. About 2,000 of them were found abandoned on Robben Island by a ranger stationed there.
He actually noticed that this colony of Cape Cormorants had just abandoned their chicks, And so he monitored throughout the day and the evening, because it is normal for adults to leave their chicks. The chicks will crash and sort of stick together in groups, and then they'll come back and feed them. However, they did not return. So we were alerted.
They're now being cared for at Seabird Rehabilitation Centre, Sankob, and an army of volunteers. The chicks that have been admitted at the facility are of different sizes, with some older than others, and all of them are for now being hand-fed. Authorities believe the chicks may have been abandoned because of a drop in the numbers of prey hunted by their parents in the nearby waters.
There is a theory that there was a lack of food. Fish surveys done in 2020 has shown that their prey, which is anchovy, and to a lesser extent sardine, was very low last year. And so if the parents are not finding enough food for themselves and to sustain their chicks, then they'll just abandon their chicks.
Authorities say this is the second biggest seabird rescue operation in the Western Cape, and that the quick intervention may have helped increase the chicks' chances of survival. The seabirds will be rehabilitated here over the next few months until they will be released back into the wild, where they'll play an important role increasing their critically low numbers. Andrew, CGTN, Cape Town.
And time now for your sports news. Here's what's ahead. We'll be talking to Africa's 100 meters champion Akani Simbine, who is eyeing the gold at the Tokyo Games this summer.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
The postponement of the Tokyo Olympic Games frustrated many athletes who are showing early season form in the build-up to the event last year. But with the Games moving to this summer, medal prospects like the African 100 meters champion Akani Simbine have had to take stock and adjust their preparations. CGTN's CS Duplessis has more.
All eyes will be on Africa's fastest man when he lines up at the Olympics in Tokyo next year. His blistering start to 2020, a personal best of 9.91 seconds, and the fastest time on South African soil, was an Olympic lead time and made him the man to beat until the pandemic brought all athletics meets to a standstill.
This year for me, when we started our first race, I was on fire. Like, I felt like this is like actually my year, because that was the fastest time I've ever ran. And then we got hit with the lockdown and just had to change the mind a bit and just try to figure out what we're doing. And it worked out at the end, you know. I'm really happy about it. I'm really happy about the year.
At the Rio Olympics, the South African 100-meter champion came agonizingly close to a spot on the podium, finishing 5th, 300ths of a second off 3rd place. Since then, he has taken the experience in his stride.
I learned a lot from those 4 years. I learned, like, you know, I need to relax. Like, from Olympics, I took that I need to relax at the end of the race, you know. From 2017, I said to myself, okay, you know what, I'm that close, I just need to work just a little bit harder and just push myself a little bit harder. And from last year, it was just, you know, I need to fight to the end, you know. And I think for me, that was the 4 big things that actually I was missing, and now I feel like I have.
But the 27-year-old admits he is no longer the shy guy just aiming for a place in the final. His lofty ambitions include claiming a spot on the podium and making history in the famous 100-meter race in Tokyo.
It's a very respected position, you know, and no one can take that away from me. You know, if I go to the Olympics and I win the gold medal for the 100 meters, you know, no South African has ever done that, no African has ever done that. And when I stand on the line, I'm not just representing South Africa, I'm representing the whole continent, you know, and that's a really big thing. And, you know, I take upon that myself, and, you know, I want to do the country proud and I want to do the continent proud.
Africa's fastest man started 2020 with a personal best before the pandemic brought a halt to his momentum. But luckily, the 27-year-old managed to squeeze in 4 European races where he was undefeated. Simbine's final race in Rome, a sub-10-second 100, has given him the confidence and belief to dream big in 2021, where Olympic gold is very much in his sights. CS Duplessis, CGTN, Johannesburg.
Arsenal will be looking to return to winning ways in the Premier League.